Good evening and welcome to this backstage. This year we celebrated many anniversaries. We celebrated through backstages and other events a lot of anniversaries like the one of Auto Delta, 8C, Alfa 33, and we will celebrate Giulia Spring GT in November. But one of the most important celebrations is without a doubt the 100 years of the Quadrifoglio, for everything that the Quadrifoglio represents for Alfa Romeo and for Alfa lovers. Alfa Romeo devoted a celebration logo that will be put on the Quadrifoglio cars of this year to this event, and this year is focused with many activities on this celebration and this anniversary. So without further ado, I would ask Giorgio Sivocci, who needs no presentation, to join me on stage. Good afternoon, everybody. Please, Giorgio, take a seat, and we can start to talk a little bit about the history of the Quadrifoglio, how everything started, how it developed, and what the Quadrifoglio represents today. First of all, let's start from 1923. So everybody knows that the Quadrifoglio was born in the Targa Florio in 1923 because Ugo Sivocci painted it on the car, but we are talking about history, so you can tell us who your grandfather was, Ugo Sivocci, before the Targa Florio. Yes, everybody remembers the name of Sivocci, coupling it to the Quadrifoglio and the Targa Florio, which was won in 1923, but actually his story began much before. He started racing with the cars more than 20 years before. He was born in Campania, but then moved to Milano. He started in the beginning of the century running with a bicycle and then motorbike and then passing on the four wheels. There were good results in the bicycle racing, but his brother was better than him, so he moved to another sport. He went to motorsports. So this first activity was done under Ottav, a company from Milan, and then he went to De Vecchi. De Vecchi was a different company with higher aims compared to Ottav, and with De Vecchi he also competed in his first two Targa Florio, 1913 and 14. And in De Vecchi, in 1918, when he was already an official pilot of this brand, he met Alberto Ascari, who was head of the mechanics in that company. Antonio Ascari. I hope I didn't get the name wrong. Did I say Alberto? Yes, it was a little mistake. Well, then he had a son who would become world champion. Anyway, it was him who helped Ascari to debut in the races, because Ascari was a head mechanician, but he never took part in the competitions. And the first competition it took part in, Antonio Ascari, coincides with the first victory of Alfa Romeo in 1911 in the Modena Criterio, and I remember that you devoted a backstage a few years ago to that event. So, continuing with my grandfather's story. After the war, De Vecchi became CNM. It was an administration change. So in CNM he continued his sports activity. He raced in another Targa Florio, and a few months before he took in the racing world also Enzo Ferrari. So Ferrari was a guy who was looking for his life, so to speak. In that period, he was attracted by automobiles, as it was the case with many young people the same. So it took him with him. He helped him because he gave him a place, and then at the Berceto race, he let him debut, and then they went to the 10th Targa Florio together, if I'm not wrong. So they didn't finish in very good position, but that race was famous because it was also the debut of Enzo Ferrari. But Sivocci at one point debuted with the Grand Prix, not with any Grand Prix, but with the Fiat that at the beginning of the 20s was the strongest in the championship. Yes, there are several significant episodes in Sivocci's sports career. One of these is the debut to the first Italian Grand Prix that was held in Montichiari in the province of Brescia, but he ran with a Fiat 801 at that competition. We don't know why. There was this exchange of pilots in that occasion. On that occasion, Alfa Romeo was probably not ready for the Grand Prix races. He had some pilots, so probably there was an exchange of favors. So this first historical competition had Ugo Sivocci as one of the main protagonists. Yeah, but I wanted to hear something about Ugo Sivocci before the Targa Florio of 1923. It is important to say that Sivocci was not a pilot who came there by chance, but in the Alfa Romeo team, he was the one with more experience at the Targa Florio because he already participated in 6. He was experienced in high-performance cars because he drove the Fiat 801 at the Grand Prix d'Italia, who had almost no rivals at the time. So, Ugo Sivocci, hired in Alfa Romeo, was a signal, a strong signal, meaning arriving to the Targa Florio with a big, strong team with other important names, but he was the most experienced. The Targa Florio was not a race like any other. It was not even only a race. Targa Florio was a social event, a mundane event who had an incredible communication potential. The Florio family was a bourgeois family of that bourgeoisie who aimed at aristocracy, had a strong relationship with artists, had very strong relationships all over Europe. For 1 week, the entire European socialites arrived in Sicily for a week for the Targa Florio, by train, by special means. It was like the event who allowed a pilot to become a famous pilot and to a brand to become one of the most sought after brands. So everyone arrived at the Targa Florio with high expectations despite other races. So everybody was there, and winning in front of that audience meant becoming famous. So when the P2 debuted a few years later, Nicola Romeo asked Giuliano to design a car that would be the identity card of Alfa Romeo. That is true, but the real identity card in the international races was the Targa Florio, the 1923 edition. And that edition, 1923, is remembered by everyone with this image, the image of Ugo Sivocci, who, with his car, number 13, and with the fenders, is racing. Yes, with the fenders, and the other cars of the Alfa Romeo team didn't have the fenders. This probably indicated, as you said, the experience of the pilot due to previous competitions. So he thought that that device was useful to maintain focus for the entire race, because not having the fenders meant being hit by stones and dust for more than 7 hours. So also this, I think, helped in the finish line to win. Well, in that race, several cars participated. The official ones were the one by Savocci, Masetti, Campari, and Ascari, who was called the master. Ferrari was there too. Yes, Ferrari with a car who was not really official, was semi-official. Yes, you are true. So the role of Antonio Ascari on that occasion with that win had a very strong meaning also for the birth of the Quadrifoglio, because we see this nice car who looks as if it's still clean just at the beginning of the race, but there's another image even more significant, the image of Antonio Ascari with a broken car with a lot of people, yes, struggling, and many people on board, too many, and this already should tell something. But I want to tell you something, not through the words of a journalist, by Vincenzo Florio, the one who wanted and created that race and who was the patron of that race. So I leave to the words of Vincenzo Florio the description, the story of that race. As you will see, it's a race where also luck had a certain part. The crowd's anxiety over the winner's arrival was at its most intense, and there appeared from the hills Ascari's car. At the Cerda station curve, Ascari's Alfa stalled, and along with the mechanic, the driver scrambled to rummage through the tangle of contraptions to revive the dead engine. A few dramatic minutes pass, mechanics rush in, and the car finally restarts, but crosses the finish line with 4 other people on board. Race officials do not consider the finish in those conditions valid, and Ascari must turn back. Not finding his own mechanic, he grabs a spectator who had slipped into the technical area to snoop, throws him in the mechanic's place, restarts the engine, returning to where he had stopped, and crosses the finish line again. However, a few minutes have passed, and Ascari loses the victory because in the meantime, Savocci arrives and steals first place from him. And that's the reality of things. Yes, looks like an old-time chronicle, and it is actually an old-time chronicle, but Alfa Romeo arrived at that race deserving the victory because first and second place at the last loop are Antonio Ascari and Luca Savocci by far, but then Savocci won. It was not sufficient the car or the pilot, but some luck was also needed, and we like to think that that luck was linked to the Quadrifoglio. But I like more to think that it was linked to the sports ability and skills of my grandfather, but we've seen in the picture that you showed before of Ascari that also Ascari had the Quadrifoglio painted on his car. Yes, that's why it's fair to make some clarity. Yeah, they had 2 Quadrifoglio, but Savocci won. Well, the Quadrifoglio, the 4-leaf clover, was painted on all the official cars, apart from Enzo Ferrari's one. I think that not even Masetti had it. Masetti had it in a triangular shape, at least during the tests. I have a picture when Masetti is racing and there's no symbols. Yeah, because Ferrari's one races without symbols. Masetti one, well, we have a picture during the test. Maybe they exchanged it. We don't know. But what is known is the fact that Luca Savocci raced with the Quadrifoglio on a diamond-shaped background, but Ascari raced on with the Quadrifoglio on a triangular backdrop. There are no images of Giuseppe Campari with the car in our archive. Is that one? Yes, but it doesn't come from the archive. So probably by violating some copyrights just for this conference, we took an image we don't know the origin from that shows the car of Giuseppe Campari with the Quadrifoglio on a round backdrop. So here are some myths and unbanked. The myth of the diamond which becomes a triangle when Sivocci dies. Well, I have an interpretation of this myth, and I'm curious of knowing your interpretation, but this opens another matter, the fact that the cars had the quadrifoglio painted to distinct ones, because Targa Florio was raced on a beaten track, not on asphalt, and it was difficult to recognize the numbers or the color of the car. So, as they still do today on racing cars, it's plausible that they put some different symbols allowing to immediately spot and recognize the pilot, even though the car is distant, is dirt, or fast. So the winning one is the car with a diamond background, and we're used to see Sivocci's one with the diamond, but the diamond is no longer used. So, legends apart, we're talking about a character who was highly respected. So you have your own interpretation. Yes, I have an interpretation. So considering that legends are not completely invented, usually, I try to give my interpretation, keeping into account of the images that you've shown, and of an image that I have at home, that I believe is not in your archives. We have two in our family. It's two RL photographed. One is Sivocci and Guatta, and in the quadrifoglio we have the Alfa Romeo crest. So that's probably because for the decision of a pilot or the direction from that moment on, the quadrifoglio on the diamond backdrop should have become and would become an official logo of Alfa Romeo. And then a few months afterwards, there was an accident in which Sivocci died, so he came to Monza during the test. So these are the pictures. So during the test of the first European Grand Prix and third Italian Grand Prix, this is the first car of the Alfa Romeo Grand Prix, the GPR Grand Prix Romeo, who was later called P1, and probably he was given the responsibility of the fine-tuning because he was the only pilot having important experience in Alfa Romeo Grand Prix, having raced at the first Italian Grand Prix with Fiat in 21. So it was a car to fine-tune, having several problems. Alfa Romeo raced in the front of Mussolini, the king, etc. They were among the audience, so it was hard to race, and they did everything to make the car the more competitive ever. So the last loop was tragic, and for him it was fatal. He went out at the Ascari variant, he went into the woods and he died. The quadrifoglio was not yet painted on the car at number 17, as you see in the other picture. And then the myth was born, the legend. Help me, I don't have the words to express it. Help me. Yes, someone thought it was jinxed. So they were taking away the number 17 on the Italian cars to ward off ill luck, and at the same time having no quadrifoglio, then the quadrifoglio was considered a good charm, so they always put it on Alfa's car. But Sivocci ran with 13 at the Targa Florio, then with 17. Yes, he was not believing in bad luck or good luck. He raced with number 13 and with number 17. I don't believe he was. In my family, we are not. We don't believe in good luck or bad luck. So, and fingers crossed, because you never know. It's better to be prudent in these things, but I don't think that bad luck exists. So another legend was who started to paint the Quadrifoglio, who decided it. And to simplify it, we say that Ugo Sivocci had the Quadrifoglio painted by someone. So being a team affair, it's probable that it was a shared decision. We cannot know. The history, as it is told, says that his idea was the initial idea for this team. But I think it was true, because in the team, his opinion was important, since they brought both Ascari and Ferrari in the racing world. So these two pilots gave weight to his opinion due to experience and age, but I want to add something else. There was someone who for years could have said the truth about the story, Enzo Ferrari, but Enzo Ferrari never said this story was not true, so he was there, and I think that since he never said this story was not true, we have the confirmation that this legend could have something true. As all legends, and Enzo Ferrari has always been a legend, a lover of legends and myths. Anyway, after that win in 1923, that didn't arrive by chance, and was very important, because then the RL, that to that moment was, so to speak, well, not easy to market, after the win of the Targa Florio, becomes the best seller, the best-selling car of the post-war period of Alfa Romeo. And the only car, the first car who won, who sold more than that in Alfa Romeo, arrived in the 50s. So that car was launched internationally by that win. We have the Museum of RL. It was sold in India. The brother of the Japan's emperor drove an RL that he bought in London and was a student. So it's a car that brought the Alfa Romeo logo all over the world. But the Quadrifoglio starts to have a life in its own. So it starts to be used on the official cars in every race. I underline on the official cars because it identified the official cars. So at the time, red for the Italian cars had already been used for some years, since 1907 actually. And in international races, there was this norm of painting the car with the colors of the brand, and the pilot worn with the colors of his country. Anyway, the official cars had this Quadrifoglio. The first official car that started in the P2 Grand Prix was designed by Vittorio Iano the next year, the following year, 1924, and then he won the first Grand Prix championship for those cars. So Alfa Romeo became on top of the big automobile brands for racing cars also. But what is not known is that in 1925, so not only in 23 and 24, but also when Alfa Romeo was already a recognized and renowned brand, in 1924 Alfa Romeo won in Lyon, and Fiat withdrew his cars. Fiat was till that moment the best one, but there was no chance to win against the P2, so they withdrew their cars. So it's no longer like in 2024 of a debuting brand, but on the opposite of a consolidated brand who would win all the races. It took part 2, with the exception of the European Grand Prix raced in Monderie, where Antonio Ascari died in a very difficult accident. Vittorio Iano says, we don't race with a dead pilot. The team withdrew, and that would be the only race where they did not win. But in 25, what happened? The official cars of the Alfa Romeo do not race with the 4-leaf clover, but as we see on the Sport Illustrato Domenica Corriere, they race with the clover. So the first thing to say is, oh, the person who drew these drawings made a mistake, maybe it was a wrong interpretation. But no, that's not the case, because also in the official pictures of 1925 we see that P2 raced almost all of the races with the clover, so three-leaf clover. So please do not invent other legends, because Ascari was still alive. So it is simply a decision which would remain a mystery, one of those stories that are part of the history of Alfa Romeo without finding an explanation. Yeah, I gave my interpretation to this. And this can be the case with drawing the diamond as a symbol of respect after the death of Ugo Sivocci. But now, well, now you see that it is done often when some important pilot retires from the races. But I don't know, it's my personal opinion. So the symbol was his because it was on his car. So as a symbol of respect, they did this. Anyway, triangle or diamond, four-leaf clover or three-leaf clover, we get to the end of 1925 with Gastone Brilli-Peri win, the person who before surpassing the others whistled to startle his competitors, won in Monza and wins the World Championship. Can I add something? Something linked to Brilli-Peri. In 22, during a Targa Florio, Brilli-Peri had an accident and his car overturned. It was my grandfather who stopped and helped him because he was dying, suffocating under the car. So in his memories, Brilli-Peri recalls this episode, thanking Sivocci. So it was the first World Championship of Alfa Romeo, so there's a little bit of part of Sivocci. Yet the victory of the World Championship coincides also with the withdrawal of Alfa Romeo from the Grand Prix races, not for their own choice, but because, as always, the federation wants to stop a cycle lasting only 2 years and one valid for the World Championship, but then they changed the norms. The cars are no longer 2 liters. Alfa Romeo at that moment had no possibility, industrial, commercial, financial, or the willingness to create a new car. They withdrew as winners, and for some time, till 1930, they didn't race in the Grand Prix with official cars, but the Quadrifoglio remains. Other sports categories races are raced with the Quadrifoglio on the official cars, and from that moment on, I don't even need to tell it, all the official cars will race with the Quadrifoglio, exception made for the period where races are managed by the Ferrari, where the logo will be not the official brand, but by the Ferrari with his horse. And we're used to see the Quadrifoglio on many cars, but also on other parts. Let's think about the Caproncino, the Caprone CA100, which is equipped with a 6C1750 Grand Sport engine. That plane, who was destined to become the automobile of the sky, to sell in high numbers, well, relatively high compared to cars, so debuted by racing the airplane Italian race, and it sported a Quadrifoglio, and the same would appear on boats, on racing cars. We know that also boats had a prestigious career, just like the cars. But making a step forward, we get to the moment when the Quadrifoglio starts to get out of the racing universe, entering another chapter of the Alfa Romeo history. So for the first time, they started to think about the Quadrifoglio not as a symbol to paint on the bonnet, but as a real logo. And the logo in a company must be painted, codified, especially if you think about realizing it on a product. What we see here are samples, drafts, hand-painted and cut out. These are part of the archive, which has just been catalogued, and this will later arrive in big size for the first time on a road car. So for the first time, the Clover in that year arrives on the road, because Giulia TI was born in 500 exemplaries. It was the minimum to be standardized for the Turismo department, but it was destined to the races. But in order to see the Quadrifoglio used in real production, we had to wait a few more years, when in 1966 the Giulia Sprint GT Veloce 105/36 was presented. In that case, the Quadrifoglio is not only applied, but for the first time it is also created as a badge, so not only a sticker as it was on the Giulia TI Super and many racing cars, no longer hand-painted as historically it had been done on the racing cars, but elevated to logo, a real logo on an enameled metal badge on the back support of the car. So from that moment on, the Alfa Romeo cars with the logo of the Quadrifoglio became more than one, and we know this. The next step was to use the Quadrifoglio not only as an image, but also as a name. And in this case, we had to wait a lot, well, a period that in the automobile world is very long, and get to the 80s, when for the first time Alfetta and Alfa Sul start to have a Quadrifoglio version called exactly Quadrifoglio. Today we're used to have a Quadrifoglio version, we still have it in the catalog of today, but at that time it was an absolute innovation. The other novelty was that this symbol of the Quadrifoglio that becomes a badge from a sticker and becomes an official logo, starts to be codified to identify different versions. So, in particular, it starts to have two declinations, the golden Quadrifoglio and the green Quadrifoglio, identifying, and for the Alfa lovers it's very simple and clear, the high and the gold from the point of view of setups, and the green from the point of view of sports elements of the car. So the logos were used in different ways and were interpreted differently. Sometimes the Quadrifoglio used by itself, sometimes it is called the green Quadrifoglio. And we arrive to today, but there was another transformation. At one point, the Quadrifoglio is abbreviated. So, to us, this is a very strong concept. It's called the Q. So the first apparition of the Q4 arrives when the 33 starts to be christened Alfa 33 Q4, because Q4 becomes the definition with which all the permanent four-wheel drive are identified from the 90s. Q4 will be on the Alfa 33 immediately, then 164, then 155. But Q4 is the dawn of a new naming era that we see in the years debuting other Q, the Q2, with specific elements on the 147 Alfa GT, and on, for example, easier things like the Q-Tronic and Q-Systems, the names through which Alfa identified on 156 the automatic shift system. So from 1923 it arrived to the modern era, creating a sort of code, an Alfa Romeo coding identified different things, cars, segments, components, options, But of course, this use of the quadrifoglio requires some rules. And if in those years the quadrifoglio was painted on the car, every time maybe inventing it with different elements, for example, the color, the orientation, the part of the base to the left or to the right, well, the quadrifoglio starts to be designed, and the design is official. There are technical drawings, there are studies, developments, which little by little bring to the definition of the quadrifoglio. The quadrifoglios, because there are more than one versions. In this case, nothing should be taken for granted. And this process is a creative process, but maybe someone who has eye for the detail recognizes this draft, which then gave way to this kind of lettering and badge that would be used, even though not with the name Giulietta. But this would be the font and graphics for Alphabet, Alpha Sud, etc. But these are all samples and drawings and designs coming from the design department. And all this would be used to codify, to standardize, strictly speaking, the symbol of the quadrifoglio. And these standards, so where do you put the leg, the size of the quadrifoglio, in which position should it be applied, when it should be present, when it should not be present. So, as for all the other symbols, this is put in the brand books, like big manuals, these ones, where they explain how to use the graphics. So there's a chapter explaining how to use the logos, a chapter explaining how to use the lettering, where they should be applied. And oftentimes there are also pre-cut sheets with the different symbols that had already been printed that can be cut out and applied to the graphics. So, if I had to, for example, headed lettering, I use the specific quadrifoglio and I use it according to the rule. If I need to do an advertisement visual, I use another one. So you see in this line the different quadrifoglio, but you should think about hundreds of pages with the colors, the logos, the lettering, and every little detail has to be standardized for all communication to be homogeneous and recognizable. So the brand books were distributed not only in the company, in the different departments, but oftentimes also to the sales network and to the dealers, because when a dealer did a quote estimate and decided to use an Alfa Romeo brand, a logo, a quadrifoglio lettering, had to respect certain rules. So they went to the typography, they detached the quadrifoglio of the right size, and they asked to have it printed perfectly as it was. So this is an evolved codification, and this was necessary because the quadrifoglio, as we said before, started to be used on many materials, on cars and on what is linked to automobiles, so promotional material, contracts, quote estimates, leaflets, and the quadrifoglio starting from the 60s. So when they decided to use it before on the TI Super, and then on the Giulia Springetti Veloce, and what came afterwards starts to become one of the key elements of the communication of Alfa Romeo. And this is visible under different point of views. One is, without a doubt, the publicity. Publicity starts to have always the quadrifoglio. They use the word quadrifoglio. They described in general the concept of sportsmanship using the word quadrifoglio. So you see in the sign, under the sign of the four-leaf clover and the design of the quadrifoglio means that it's a sports version of something, and riding quadrifoglio or using a quadrifoglio four-leaf clover was enough to sum up the sportsmanship and racing values linked to Alfa Romeo. It was used a lot in the launch campaign of Alfa Sud to prove that Alfa Sud, which was a disruptive car, was imbued with all the values of Alfa Romeo. It was used even more abroad, especially in France, with a series that had dozens of versions linked to the illness of alphism. So many of you know the alpha virus, isolated in this bottle. It has the quadrifoglio shape, but it's a long series identifying all the stages of the illness, diagnosis, contagion. So the quadrifoglio starts to become a way to communicate, in short, a series of Alfa Romeo values, but not only. The quadrifoglio also starts to identify the house organ. So the quadrifoglio is not the first internal magazine by Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo historically had a very strong relationship with the world of art, culture and society. So it went through the collaboration with many artists. Back in the past, let's think about the 20s, 26, the collaboration with René Magritte for the commercial and the billboard that you saw everywhere. But in the same years, other collaboration started, and at the end of the 30s, a magazine called Rassegna Alfa Corse was published. Rassegna Alfa Corse is a house organ in the modern way. So they didn't talk about automobiles only, they talked about the company as well, and there were articles talking about art, leisure time. So it was a real magazine in the modern way. Rassegna Alfa Corse was given this name because it coincides with the purchase of Ferrari, then its closure and the birth of Alfa Corse. It was like a propaganda betting on aggressive behavior, competitiveness. Then the Second World War passed and the new magazine arrived, simply called Alfa Romeo. Then there was Il Portello, which was the magazine of the workers, so not directly printed by Alfa Romeo, but by the Association of Employees. And then there was Alfa Notizie, many other house organs. But the one who was relaunched with a full-fledged presentation, with the presentation by Giuseppe Loraghi, was Il Quadrifoglio, which was born in the same period of the use of the quadrifoglio on the GT Veloce. So many know Il Quadrifoglio because it had a long story and it arrived till the 2000s in the classical edition, the Italian one, but it also was published in several languages for several countries, with the Spanish, German, French, Dutch. In yellow you see the version for the Israeli market. So the activity of publication and research at the San David Quadrifoglio had an international market, continuing with the final editions in the 90s and then the beginning of the 2000s. So the history of your grandfather went on. Yes, it would be the embryo originating to the family and to a real generation of quadrifoglio. Let's put it like this. Il quadrifoglio arrives till the modern day and is still continues to be used and communicated, and it continues to be associated with the high-end cars and sports cars. Now, I want to show you a couple of videos now. One, what we will see at the end of this backstage, is our celebratory video summing up all this. But before, I'd like to give you 5 minutes of fun, because when I told you about using the quadrifoglio in the communication, well, there were noble uses, but there were also some hiccups, as it appears today. But they wanted to use the quadrifoglio in the communication so much that maybe sometimes they exaggerated. So please, let's start with the first of the videos. Once upon a time, there was a far distant country where the meadows were greener and more beautiful than any others. Meadows that were so green that didn't suffer from the drought of the summer or the ice of the winter. And these meadows were full of clovers, but special clovers. Oh, this didn't come out well. It's a two-leaf clover. I thought that my clover was green till I saw yours. As we were saying, the clovers were built in the woods by the cooperative of elves, and everyone was happy and merry and satisfied apart from one, the Fortuneo elf. He was against the traditional clover that was constructed in the woods. He said that it was an old model. I'm working on a huge invention, a very special clover with a new line, innovative. You'll see that the meadows will become greener and more beautiful, but there will also be more luck. But no one listened to him. So one day, Fortuneo the elf appeared in the meadows with his model of new clover. He thought a little bit about it, and then he decided, I will call it four-leaf clover. A new dawn in the history of the meadows and of luck had just begun. But even four-leaf clovers, as all roses, had some thorns. Fortuneo was building the best four-leaf clovers in the world. He put it in the meadows. Some people found it, and then some luck. That's it. But Fortuneo wanted more. He was ambitious. He wanted to find someone to bring his four-leaf clover even higher and bring it international fame. In 1923, one day the elf entered in a workshop and he found the right man. In the workshop, a man was lovingly looking at his car. The man was Ugo Sivocci, a pilot from Alfa, and his car was the fabulous Alfa RL Targa Florio. Good evening, Mr. Sivocci. I have the pleasure to introduce you my four-leaf clover. It's a symbol of luck. The car is already marvelous, but a pilot like me needs luck anyway. That's the right symbol at the right moment. Come, give me a hand. Help me. So Ugo Sivocci, inspired by an elf, painted on his Alfa Targa Florio RL the first four-leaf clover, the first quadrifoglio, on a triangular white backdrop. A few days later, at the Targa Florio, on the Madonia circuit, thanks to his driving skills and the quadrifoglio, Ugo Sivocci incredibly and beautifully won. He won because he had my four-leaf clover. So we told many stories, and that was the proof of them. So you see how embarrassed I was introducing this video. It's so cool. Where did you find it? In our documentation center, and that's why we cut it abruptly at the end. But this video, it's 16 minutes. We saw just 5 minutes, but it lasts 60 minutes. They started to explain how the quadrifoglio was applied in the letter year to get to the Gamma Alfetta Alfa Sud promotion at the end, so with discounts, open days on Sundays, etc. So what you saw is something that was done in the mid-80s for promotional reasons. It was a commercial, and this tells a lot about the Quadrifoglio, and also is a proof that not everything was made perfectly. If we look at today, it's appalling, and we also explain ourselves why it's not so widespread and well known, because when you watch it, you locked it? Yes, it's hard to think about using it again. Anyway, the effort to explain to a wide audience the origin of the Quadrifoglio was done many, many times. And this also explains why oftentimes some messages were not well received, because in the research for stories to tell, the temptation to exaggerate them sometimes takes place. Sometimes it becomes ridiculous, sometimes you use elves, and other times you say that you take away a corner from the diamond because Gusibocci died. Anyway, we can see it as a sum of volumes representing Alfa Romeo for 100 years. So you have been studying this story for years, you have updated your books and website continuously. Yes, I started 20 years ago, a little bit more, almost by chance. The real motivation was to understand how the internet was working, so creating a website, and of course the topic that I was interested in, what was suggested by a friend, it was the history of my grandfather. I immediately received a good answer and reaction, and then you always find something new, like this one. You have to send me this cartoon. Well, do you want to see the 16 minutes? Well, even just the beginning is enough. But today you are a constant present, you are on the press, you go to the different clubs. Yes, I'm like a jolly. I travel around telling the stories. Of course, it's not my story, but the story of my grandfather that I'm happy to share. Even though I'm kind of shy and I don't really like to be on stage and being interviewed. Yeah, but you're always very nice. So I thank you for participating today, for telling us this story, on which everybody thinks to know everything, but then some details are always missing and come out even after 100 days. So I thank you for participating to this backstage. I thank Giorgio. Thank you, not Giorgio, you always add value to our backstages. But before leaving you, I would like to show you a serious video, a video that we realized on the occasion of this anniversary that we launched today, and that will become our video to communicate the 100 years of the Quadrifoglio, which I hope you will like and you will share on your profile. So I thank you for being part of this backstage and celebration of this important symbol, and wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Il Quadrifoglio compie 100 anni. Per alcuni è un portafortuna, per la squadra corse probabilmente aveva un significato, serviva a riconoscere le vetture, ma in oltre un secolo è diventato uno dei simboli più forti dell'Alfa Romeo, su cui ruotano vittorie, grandi imprese e anche molte leggende. È il 15 aprile 1923 quando Ugo Sivocci, al volante della RL, taglia il traguardo della Targa Florio, davanti a un pubblico travolto dall'entusiasmo e davanti a un compagno di squadra, Ascari, ancora incredulo per aver mancato di un soffio la vittoria nella corsa più importante della stagione. Per vincere la targa ci vuole l'automobile perfetta, Ettore Bugatti sostiene non esista un tracciato più adatto e terribile per verificare la qualità del progetto. Poi serve il talento del pilota e serve un pizzico di fortuna. L'Alfa Romeo, con la versione corsa della RL, capolavoro di Giuseppe Merosi, ha pronto uno strumento formidabile. E la squadra è composta da grandi nomi: l'esperto Sivocci, il maestro Antonio Ascari, il fedelissimo e simpatico Giuseppe Campari, ma anche Masetti e un giovane Enzo Ferrari. Forse, per non lasciare nulla al caso, sui cofani viene dipinto un quadrifoglio come portafortuna. O più razionalmente è utile riconoscere le vetture ufficiali, anche quando sfrecciano ricoperte da polvere e fango, mentre le forme dello sfondo bianco sono più leggibili dei numeri per distinguere i piloti. Il triangolo per Ascari, il cerchio per Campari e così via. A tagliare per prima il traguardo sarà però la RL con il quadrifoglio su uno sfondo romboidale, quella di Ugo Sivocci.
Mio nonno Ugo sicuramente tra i 4 piloti ufficiali Alfa Romeo era quello con maggiore esperienza. Nel 1923 era già la sua 6ª targa Florio. Ricordiamoci anche che all'interno della squadra aveva un'influenza particolare in quanto aveva portato nel mondo delle corse sia Ascari sia Ferrari. Che fosse superstizioso mio nonno, non credo. Ha corso col numero 13, ha corso col numero 17, quindi il quadrifoglio, sì, un simbolo sicuramente benaugurante, ma non legato ad una sua superstizione. Era un tipo abbastanza razionale e calcolatore, anche nella guida lo dimostra il fatto che quasi tutte le sue gare sono giunte al termine, non hanno mai avuto incidenti meccanici, quindi anche la guida rifletteva un po' e rispecchiava quello che era il suo modo d'essere. Direi che un pizzico di fortuna non guasta mai, non guastava soprattutto in quegli anni dove il rischio era veramente tanto e la parola sicurezza all'interno del mondo delle corse non esisteva.
Quella vittoria rappresenta il primo grande trionfo internazionale per l'Alfa Romeo. Una grande spinta commerciale per la RL, tanto da diventare l'Alfa Romeo più venduta fino alla Seconda Guerra Mondiale. E il debutto del quadrifoglio, ora con la maiuscola, subito consacrato vero e proprio simbolo delle vetture da corsa del Biscione.
Ugo Sivocci muore a Monza qualche mese dopo la vittoria nella targa Florio, l'8 settembre del 1923, durante le prove di quello che era il primo Gran Premio d'Europa, nonché terzo Gran Premio d'Italia. Sulla sua vettura non era ancora stato dipinto il quadrifoglio, quindi probabilmente anche questa coincidenza contribuì poi ad alimentare la leggenda a portafortuna di questo simbolo che è rimasto ancora sulle vetture Alfa Romeo.
Nei primi anni ci sarà un po' di confusione a proposito della corretta grafica, tanto che nel 1925 molte gare ufficiali per il campionato del mondo vedranno i cofani delle imbattibili P2 ornate addirittura da un trifoglio.
Perché al giorno d'oggi è arrivato quindi un triangolo e non un rombo come sfondo del quadrifoglio? Mi piace pensare che siano stati proprio i suoi compagni di squadra a voler omaggiare la morte e l'amicizia che avevano con Ugo, ritirando questo simbolo, come ancora oggi viene fatto per esempio con tanti campioni dello sport a loro fine carriera.
Gli anni 20 e 30 vedranno molti trionfi, talvolta il quadrifoglio lascerà il posto ai colori degli equipaggi privati e per un lungo periodo sarà rimpiazzato dal cavallino rampante della scuderia Ferrari. Ma i più grandi trionfi, in pista, in strada, in cielo e anche in acqua, saranno sotto il segno del quadrifoglio, fino ai primi 2 titoli mondiali di Formula 1, vinti da Farino e Fangio sulle Alfetta 158 e 159 nel 1950 e 51. La prima vera rivoluzione per il quadrifoglio avviene però nel 1963 con il lancio della Giulia TI Super, quando per la prima volta il quadrifoglio, un adesivo verde, esce dalla pista per ornare una vettura stradale. Se la TI Super è comunque una pronto corsa, è con la Giulia Springiti Veloce del 1966 che il quadrifoglio, non più verniciato o adesivo, viene nobilitato da una mostrina smaltata e inizia a identificare il top della gamma. Proprio in quegli anni il quadrifoglio vive una seconda giovinezza, inizia a essere utilizzato per le campagne di comunicazione e diventa protagonista delle pubblicità, tutti materiali che oggi vivono al centro documentazione Alfa Romeo.
Da un lato il quadrifoglio viene codificato, sono definite forme, dimensioni, posizioni, modi di utilizzo e colori. Dall'altro, molte campagne pubblicitarie, soprattutto estere, vengono interamente incentrate sul quadrifoglio, che diviene vero e proprio simbolo della passione per il marchio e sinonimo di sportività. Basti pensare alla celebre campagna francese che esplora tutte le fasi della passione, fino ad arrivare al virus alfa.
Passo a passo, da portafortuna, il quadrifoglio diviene vero e proprio marchio, capace di fare ombra al marchio vero e proprio, quello con la croce e il biscione. Uno strumento perfetto per creare una vera e propria community ante litteram.
Alfa Romeo ha sempre avuto un approccio colto e visionario alla comunicazione, grandi eventi, collaborazioni con artisti, scrittori e nomi noti della cultura internazionale. Poi c'è il capitolo house organ e riviste, in cui si parla certo di auto, ma anche di arte, viaggi e società. Dall'enfatica rassegna Alfa Corse ad Alfa Romeo e Alfa Romeo Notizie. Nel 1966 viene lanciato il nuovo brillante spigliato quadrifoglio, che fra alti e bassi, chiusure e rinascite, arriverà fino agli anni 2000.
Nel frattempo, con Alfetta e Alfa Sud, per la prima volta, alcune versioni vengono chiamate quadrifoglio e non solo identificate con la mostrina. Verde per le sportive e oro per gli allestimenti più lussuosi. La 33, l'Alfa 90, la 75 e così via, tutte avranno le loro versioni quadrifoglio. In tempi più recenti anche la Mito, la Giulietta e soprattutto Giulia e Stelvio, che batteranno record e segneranno un punto di svolta. Mentre in gara continuano le sfide, dalle turismo alle sport, dai monomarca alla Formula 1. Se il logo e il nome quadrifoglio identificano le versioni al vertice della gamma, l'iniziale Q, a partire dagli anni 90, identifica alcune delle soluzioni tecniche più esclusive. La prima è la trazione integrale permanente, che debutta sulla 33 con il nome di Permanent 4, ma che presto viene ribattezzata Q4, dando vita a un vero e proprio logo. In seguito vedranno la luce altre soluzioni, come il differenziale autobloccante Q2 o il cambio automatico Q-System e poi Q-Tronic. Oggi, a 100 anni dalla vittoria della Targa Florio, il quadrifoglio, dipinto sulla fiancata, ha più che mai un significato. Dietro di lui vivono imprese, personaggi, vittorie, sfide e tanta passione.